Welcome to a new episode of Create Your Own Home Lab. In this video, I want to show you how you can download something from GitHub using Ansible. And that something will be YQ. YQ is for parsing YAML files, and during the video, you will learn about creating symbolic links using the GitHub API, using multiple tasks files in an Ansible role, and using Ansible facts. If you prefer reading, you can find a link in the description to the blog post which you can see next to me. Before we start to talk about the Ansible facts, let's discuss the structure of the Ansible role. We have some familiar folders like the defaults and the tasks folder, and we also have a new folder called vars. We have a README.md, which is the documentation of the Ansible role, and at the beginning of this documentation, we will have a main title, which is the name of the Ansible role. After the main title, you can have a short description which describes what the Ansible role is for. And in my case, it is a longer description because I also wanted to describe what packages this Ansible role would install and what those packages are for. And then the first subsection is the requirements, where you can describe, for example, the required operating systems or the Linux distributions. You can also write about the required CPU architectures and some required package managers. The next section is role variables, which I will skip for now, and let's talk about the dependencies. In the dependencies section, you can write about other Ansible roles, which would run when you run this Ansible role. I don't have any dependencies, so this is all I could write about that in this section. And then you can have an example playbook. This simple example Ansible playbook can show how the role parameters can be set, and even if you don't want to share your Ansible role, it could be useful even for you, because you may forget after 2 weeks how you created your Ansible role. After the example playbook, you can have a license, which is useful if you want to share your Ansible role, and isn't if you don't, unless you are afraid of stealing your own work. And you could also have an author information section, which I don't have here. So if you want to see some examples, you can check my blog post. And now finally, let's go back to the role variables. And this is where you can describe your default Ansible parameters. Those parameters which can be changed by the users. And I usually start with the YAML block, which will contain basically the line from the default's main YAML. And it will contain the name of the Ansible variable, the parameter, and the default value. And after that YAML block, I can describe what this parameter is for. I can also describe what the valid values are. If I want to, I can include some links to external sources. And after the description, I can have another YAML block about another Ansible parameter. So we can see almost the same in the default's main YAML. And the first variable is the version of YQ, which is empty by default, and it means we want to download the latest version. And this is when we will use the GitHub API. And since we want to download something from GitHub, we also have to specify where we want to save it on the remote server. And this is the destination of the YQ binary. The default value worked on my machine, but if it doesn't work on your machine, you can change this. And the third variable is just an alias for the pigmentize command. We also have another folder called vars and the main YAML in it. And this is the place for helper variables. You don't want the user to change these. This is only for you. For example, you know that you want to download YQ from GitHub, and you also know that YQ is supported on multiple operating systems and on different architectures. Since you want to download the right release for your architecture and operating system, you want to detect the operating system and the architecture. And to do that, you can use Ansible facts. As you can see, I used Ansible_facts.system, which is the operating system of my remote server. And this is a variable, but this is something I didn't set. This was set by Ansible when I ran the playbook. So as a first step, Ansible will gather some information about the system and it will load into a variable called Ansible facts. You can disable this Ansible fact gathering, and this is what I will show you as a next step. Now let's create an example playbook, and I will call it playbook fact YAML. And in this file, I will have to set the host, which will be localhost for now. And I also want to add a task. It will be the debug module. And I want to show the value of Ansible facts system. Let's go to the terminal, and I can use my run sh script, which is basically a wrapper to run everything in an X environment. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, I recommend reading my previous blog posts or watching my previous videos. So let's just run sh playbook fact YAML, and let's see what happens. And the operating system is Darwin because I'm using macOS. Let's go back and change the host to all, which is the inventory group which contains the remote server, which I defined. And now let's try again. And I want to see Linux. Now that I finally turned it on, let's try again. And let's see Linux. Right. Let's go back, and now I will disable the fact gathering using the following parameter called gather facts, and let's set it to false. If I run this again, I will see undefined variable. Yes, variable is not defined. So sometimes you want to disable the fact gathering because you want to make your Ansible playbook faster. But you still want to have some of the Ansible facts. And if you want to gather that, then you can use the Ansible built-in setup module. And it has a parameter called gather subset. And let's use architecture. If I run this again, I hope I will see Linux again. It works. And now that we know how Ansible facts work, we can continue and create another playbook which will actually run our Ansible role. We have a simple playbook called playbook system base, which is just a playbook to install everything that our home lab requires. And we don't want to install any specific environment here. We will not run any virtual machine, but we could include the installation of LXD itself. For now, I only want to use the CLI tools role here. And we have disabled the fact gathering. We also defined the list of Ansible roles. And now we want to update apt cache. We could update the apt cache in the Ansible role, which we don't want to do because we don't want to update the cache every time we run a role which wants to use the apt package manager. We could, for example, have multiple Ansible roles, and each role would run the update of the apt cache. Instead of that, we will use the apt update task in the playbook. So we can have a pre-tasks section, and we can use the built-in apt module, but now we don't have a name. Instead, we have the update underscore cache parameter, and we set it to true. Since it will run every time, we can tell Ansible not to report any changes, so we can set changed when to false. We can also have a parameter for disabling or enabling this apt cache update, and we call that parameter to config apt update. and I added it to my Ansible inventory file. And now let's go to the tasks in the Ansible role in the main YAML. I have some hidden tasks here using the apt package manager. We don't need this now. And I have a block which is for installing formatting tools, and JQ is one of them. We also install Python 3 pigments, which will give us the pigmentize command to colorize some source code in the terminal. And since I don't like the name pigmentize because I don't think I will remember it, I will add an alias called highlight. And this is why we added this default parameter, the destination of the highlight command. So this is how we can create a symbolic link using the built-in file module. And instead of setting the state to directory, which would create a new folder, we want to set it to link. The destination will be the path to the symbolic link, and the src is the path to the pigmentize command. And then we can include another task called yq.yaml, and all we have to do is using the include tasks built-in module. But for now, I want to comment it out, and let's run this Ansible role without the yq part. Let's run playbook system base, and now Ansible will show me that everything is okay, which means that since I already installed everything, nothing has changed. Okay, it works. And now I can also check the version of YQ. So now I know that it is installed, and I have to remember the version because it will change later. So let's go back and include the YQ.yaml task file. The first task is using the built-in setup module, which we already know, so we can skip that and talk about the next task. And this task is to get the JSON response from the GitHub API. This URL has to include the name of the author and the name of the repository, and then /releases/latest. We will register a new variable so we can get the content of the JSON response, but we only want to run this task when we have an empty version number, which means that we want to download the latest version. We can run this to see the content of that variable, and I want to use a debug task, and I want to see the content of yq_latest. Since I don't want this role to continue, I also want to add another task using the fail module, and the message can be anything. So I want to run this playbook system base again, and now it will run the YQ part, but only just a part of it. So we have a very long JSON output. It's longer than my screen, but we can find some interesting URLs here. For example, this browser download URL, which contains the version number of the latest release, and it also contains the name of the release file. We don't want to use this. We will have another field in this JSON. So let's just go back. Now I want to change this variable here and add a new section to this task called vars, and use another variable called URL. I want a template, and in the template I want to get the value from yq_latest.json, dot html URL, and let's debug the value of URL. Now I go back and run playbook system base, and now I want to see only one URL and not that long JSON file. So this is the actual URL we want to use to get the version number of the latest release. Now I don't need these sections anymore. And let's see the next task. So the next step is to check if YQ is already installed. So we want to install the new release only if it is not installed yet, or if it is installed, but the specified version is not the same as the version of the installed YQ. We can also debug this variable, and the variable name is this longer registered variable name. We also want to add a fail task back with any message. Okay, let's run it. And here we can find a field called exists. It has a Boolean value, in this case true. And if it is true, it means YQ is installed. So let's go back and see the next task. So the next step is to get the version number of the already installed YQ. We have to use the built-in command module because we don't have a specific module to handle YQ in Ansible, and we only want to run this task if we have an already installed YQ. So we had to use the previously fetched stat exists field. And since this is just the command module, which will not create anything or change anything on the remote server, we also wanted to add the changed when with the false value. And we will register the result in another variable, which we will debug again. Let's do that. And now in the result, we can find stdout or stdout lines. Both will contain the same line. And we unfortunately have to use a regular expression. And now I have to get some variables here too. I will add the vars section again to the debug task. And in this case, I want to check the version number. Okay, not this way. I only want the name of this variable. So this is how the regular expression looks like. We can use the regex replace filter on the stdout field of the previously registered variable. And we can have a regular expression to get only the version number and nothing before that. And if we check this, we hope we will find only the version number in this variable. And this is the version number of the existing YQ. Okay, and the next could be this variable, the latest version number, which is using the HTML URL field. And because that was a URL, I also had to use the basename filter, which gets the last part of the path of the URL. And because I don't want to see the V at the beginning of that version, I also want to use regex replace filter to get the version number. Now let's see how it runs. And now you can see the latest version number and not the version of the existing YQ. Okay, and then we have a desired version number, which is the specified version number if we specify it. And if we don't, then it will be the latest version number. We can also run that if I change the variable here. And I want to see the latest version number. Right, so let's go back. And now we can finally go to the next task, which will install YQ. And now we want to use a condition here because we want to run this task only if there is no existing YQ, or if there is one, but the version number of the existing version is not the same as the desired version. And we also have a field here. We are using the get URL built-in Ansible module, which is for downloading files. And we use the force field set to true because we want to download this file even if we have an existing YQ. If we don't use this field set to true, we will keep the existing YQ. Okay, we can run this. And after running this playbook, I expect to have the latest YQ on my server. And I also expect from Ansible to report that the YQ version changed. Yes, I can see that. Okay, now let's check the version on the remote server. And this is exactly what I wanted to have. If now I want to override this version, meaning that I want to specify the version number, I can do it in my Ansible inventory file, or I can also do it here from the command line. All I have to do is set -e and CLI tools YQ version and set an older version number. If I run this playbook again, it will change my YQ version back to the previous one. Let's try again. And I managed to downgrade it. And now we are done. And we could learn about creating symbolic links. We could learn about using the GitHub API, using multiple task files in an Ansible role, and also using Ansible effects. And we could also use a lot of Ansible variables and templates. I hope you feel you could learn something. And if you have any notes, please let me know in the comment section.